You could say that the whole point of our channel is really to talk about guitar pedals, the great tones that they get, and a lot of artists that have used guitar pedals famously in trying to recreate those tones. But today I want to do the complete opposite of that and really talk about players that have amazing tone that never used any pedals at all. In fact, on some of these players, you might even be hard-pressed to find a tuner on any sort of floorboard or in front of them while they play. They're such purists of just having the sound of the guitar plugged directly into the amplifier. And so today we're going to go through several different players that I really love the tones of that never used any pedals. And of course, I would love to hear from you about any famous and iconic guitar players that were known to not have used any pedals at all and were just guitar straight into the amplifier sort of people, and really celebrate those guitar players, because God knows I would not be a guy that would want to play without delay or reverb or having some cushion from a compressor to help balance out my dynamics. These guys are arguably the bravest guitar players out there. Maybe sometimes it was because of resources or the time period being early on in electric guitar music and not having those same pedals available to them, or maybe they just preferred the tone without anything obstructing it between the guitar and amplifier. So let's get into it. Guitar players with great tones that used no pedals. So when we're talking about guys that use no pedals, there are probably innumerable amounts of them, and I'm just kind of sticking within the genres that I really know and players that I really love. So just take that into consideration. Again, if you have other players that fit this mold, please do tell us in the comments below. But the guy who kind of got me started on this kick of thinking about guitar players that don't use pedals is Robert Cray. Now, Robert Cray is certainly a great bluesman, has an amazing voice, and has also written some really great pop songs that kind of merge blues and pop together. I'm thinking in particular about like the Strong Persuader era, and you can hear just Robert Cray strat into presumably a twin reverb. And maybe you're just hearing the only effect being on board the amp in terms of the reverb. I think on some of those songs in the 80s, you might have heard some chorus, potentially. But for the most part, he was a guitar directly into amp guy. And even now, when you look at his stage setup, it's usually a 2-amp setup. Maybe it's a Vibro King and a matchless. But the only foot pedal you see on the floor is a tuner and maybe a foot switch that's just changing reverb on and off, or tremolo on and off, or maybe switching between a bright channel or something like that that's sitting on the floor. He's really pretty puritanical when it comes to the guitar, the sound of the amplifier, and nothing obstructing it in between. I want to play you one of my favorite Robert Cray tunes, which just exemplifies how great of a clean tone he gets, not only rhythm-wise, but in terms of his solos. This has all this beautiful quackiness, and I don't feel like I miss pedals at all. In fact, it would feel weird to hear Robert Cray using an overdrive pedal because his signature sound is so much developed around just the purity of the guitar signal. Let's check out a little Robert Cray. That was amazing. Again, Robert has, again, a beautiful voice, just a super rich and vibrant voice, and then pairing that with that beautiful Stratocaster in kind of the 2 and 4 position, just absolutely sounds amazing with a clean amp. I absolutely love his tone. I love how abbreviated his rig is and that he's able to get these amazing sounds with seemingly no effects at all. Now, another guitar player that I want to talk about, also in the same vein of the blues, and I think arguably one of the most famous bluesmen of all time, is B.B. King. Now, B.B. King never used any pedals. He had, later in his career, the infamous Gibson amplifiers, the Lab series, which were super clean solid state amps. But I think he's mostly known before that to be a twin reverb user for the most part, and kind of used whatever the era twin reverb it was, whether it was a black panel version in the mid 60s or into the ultra linear series in the 70s, and then ultimately landing on the Lab series, which again is really a clean, super sterile, like no frills amplifier that just has headroom for days. And whether you're talking about early B.B. King or 70s B.B. King or 80s and 90s B.B. King, up until his death, he was pretty much a bare bones guitar in, maybe some reverb, and really just relying on the dynamics of his instrument, changing the tone controls or the variotone on the guitar to maybe get some different sounds, whether that's thinner or thicker or brighter or darker, and making those adjustments and really relying on his fingers to bring through those tones. And obviously he's one of the most replicated guitar players amongst blues players, whether that's in today's music or even in music back then where there was a lot of guitar players that were trying to emulate what B.B. King was doing. Let's listen to a little B.B. King and what he's bringing to the table with that beautiful guitar tone, hearing a little bit of the Lucille into a clean amplifier. Let's hear it. So I absolutely love that. It sounds incredible. It's, again, when we think about blues music, it's almost like B.B. King is inseparable from that sound, those signature licks, and he made that with no extra pedals, compression, overdrive, just did it with what was there, and that's really impressive to me. Now, another guitar player that I think is well worth mentioning that falls into this category is Duane Allman from the Allman Brothers. And even as an extension of the Allman Brothers, if we want to stick with them, also Dicky Betts were not users of guitar pedals at all. It was usually Les Pauls into maybe a Tweed Fender or a Marshall, and just had these beautiful tones, whether it was Duane Allman doing slide tones or whether it was, Dicky Betts playing on this beautiful gold top. These were straight into amp sounds, and those were some of the most iconic guitar tones of all time. And whether we're talking about, Duane Allman playing on Layla, or we're talking about Dicky Betts doing Ramblin' Man, or we're talking about Whippin' Post, there's just these beautiful guitar tones that have been emulated and covered by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of guitar players. It's a guitar into an amplifier. It's nothing more than that. It's a very simple setup. The tones were very abbreviated but sounded incredible and just signify one of the most iconic sounds, especially in American rock music and Southern rock music, that these guys carved out with a guitar and an amp and a cable, and that was it. So let's listen to a little bit of Duane Allman, and we'll also listen to a little bit of Dicky Betts so we can hear kind of the Allman Brothers and how they had a super simple rig to get amazingly huge and beautiful guitar tones. Now, going a a degree of separation from the Allman Brothers. I think another person that we need to talk about who's in the same vein of kind of the Duane Allman Brothers thing that didn't use any pedals at all and still doesn't to this day, to my knowledge, except for a Peterson Strobo Stomp, is Derek Trucks. Now, Derek Trucks has one of the most iconic slide tones, I think, of any guitar player alive, where it just sounds like if we could distill the voice of an Etta James or some sort of 50s soul singer and put it inside of somebody's kind of vocal melodies that they produce with slide guitar, it would be Derek Trucks. And Derek just has an amazing tone, just so warm, so beautiful, so fat, and it's just either an Alessandro amp or for a long time was just a Fender Super Reverb and a Gibson SG and a slide, and that was all he needed in order to create the signature sound that so many players are trying to emulate, whether that's on slide or even try to emulate some of that kind of vocal style in their solo playing if they're just playing, you know, fretted with a regular guitar and no slide at all. I think Derek unquestionably is just has this amazing sound and doesn't require anything more than just the simple elements of guitar and amp. Let's listen to a little Derek Trucks and hear what he's bringing to the table without any pedals. Now I want to move into a little bit more classic rock and roll, and I think that one of the quintessential players that just had so many iconic parts but also wasn't using pedals, maybe if they were using effects was just from the amp, whether that would be tremolo or maybe some reverb, but mostly just an amp sound, is Keith Richards. And whether we're talking about a Tele into a Tweed Bassman or a Tweed Deluxe or some other sort of Fender, it's always a very just rootsy sort of sound. It's very raw and rock and roll. And whether we're talking about, Give Me Shelter or we're talking about Start Me Up, it's just a simple guitar into an amplifier, getting it nice and crunchy and getting some really, really beautiful parts out of those that have really stuck with all of us. Whether we're at a baseball game or a party, we're invariably going to hear some Stone songs that have some of these classic riffs on there, and they're super abbreviated. Again, just a guitar into an amp and just coming up with a great part, and that's all that it takes. They really, really sound amazing. So let's listen to a little Rolling Stones here. Keith Richards bring out some of those tones that we all know and love that are just super simple, no extra pedals, just the guitar and amp. Another guitar player that wasn't using pedals at all and relying primarily on the tone of his amp and guitar was none other than the brother of Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimmie Vaughan. Now, Jimmie did a great job of sort of fusing blues and a little rockabilly and had just an amazing sound that he was able to create with just a guitar and amplifier, a lot of times just using kind of Tweed era Fenders and a 50s era Stratocaster, and absolutely sounded amazing. And although he was fairly dissimilar from his brother Stevie, he still brought something unique to the table and really didn't sound anything like his brother. His whole approach to the instrument was very different. The tones that he went after were certainly much cleaner, more quacky, really, really beautiful stuff, whether we're talking about rhythm guitar or we're talking about lead tones. And I absolutely love Jimmie Vaughan and what he brings to the table. I feel like he, in many ways, is just as important to guitar as Stevie Ray Vaughan, but is often not evangelized in the same way that Stevie Ray Vaughan's tone was. Again, it was much more simple. The songs were kind of fundamentally different than what Stevie Ray was going after, but so important to the sound of guitar music. Absolutely wonderful player, absolutely amazing tones, and again, mostly just a 50s era Strat into a Tweed Bassman or some other sort of Tweed Fender amplifier. It sounds absolutely insane. Let's listen to a little Jimmie Vaughan. Let's hear what he's bringing to the table. Let's go to one more player. And again, this is just a small list of many that got amazing tones that was just using a guitar and amplifier, and that's none other than Angus Young from AC/DC. And I think a lot of us who are starting off learning guitar, we definitely want to learn those AC/DC licks, some of those signature rock and roll licks that Angus Young came up with for a lot of the great AC/DC solos. Now, you could say that he was using a wireless, which informed some of the sound, and there now are pedals that represent sort of what the preamp in that wireless unit did. But at the time, it wasn't really thought of anything more than just a way to be able to get the guitar cableless and be able to walk around stage and be able to get, you know, the performance elements of a live band and all the interactions they have with the crowd and not have to be tied to your amplifier by way of a cord. So I'm not really counting the wireless unit that a lot of people attribute as part of the sound of Angus Young to being a pedal. I think this was just a function of what was available at the time. He used it. It was part of the performance for them to walk around the stage. And so really, all in all, whether we're talking about studio Angus Young tones, you know, I know that there's some lore about him using a wireless in the studio. I think on some of the earlier albums that was not true. And it's just an amazing tone. And even, you know, guys like Mutt Lange who produced them wanted them to have that raw, unencumbered, you know, guitar into amplifier sound. And all those rhythm tones that Angus Young came up with, all of the lead tones, are absolutely insanely good and super simple. Guitar straight into amp, nothing more. Let's listen to a little bit of Angus Young and AC/DC. So those were several guitar players that got amazing tones and famously were not users of any pedals, sort of the antithesis of what we talk about every week here on this channel. And I'm really glad that we got a chance to celebrate some of these guitar players, talk about them and their music and what they offer, and really get a chance to sort of see that, of course, pedals are great. I make my living based on manufacturing and selling pedals, and I think that they're great resources to have, but they're not the only way to get amazing tone, and you don't need pedals in order to have an iconic rock and roll, blues, or whatever genre of music it is that you play tone, and clearly these artists are examples of that. Now again, if you have other artists that you know of that do not use any pedals, that are great guitarists, that have signature tones, I would love to hear from you about who those players are. I'd love to create a database or maybe even do a follow-up to this video with more players that don't use pedals, because I know a lot of you on our comments will often say, oh, you don't need any pedals, tone is in the hands. Well, these guys are actually proving that it's truly in the hands, and they've developed their signature sound around just a guitar, cable, and amplifier, so please do let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, please do give us a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you can be notified every time we come out with new content. And if you want to support us, head over to the Vertex Effects website, check out one of our pedals. I know that it's the antithesis of what this video is about, but we have all our dealers listed and where you might find one near you. Also, you can head over to therigdr.com where we offer all the accessories and pedal boards and cables and zip ties and tie-down mounts, all things that you're going to need to build a pedal board of your own. Or if you want to engage with us in a free way, you can always listen to our podcast, which is available on Apple and Spotify, as well as a video version of the podcast that's available right here on YouTube that you'll know if you subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm Marangella from Vertex Effects, aka The Rig Doctor. See you next time.